Chapter 19. At the men's end of the table the talk grew more and more animated. The colonel told them that the declaration of war had already appeared in Petersburg and that a copy, which he had himself seen, had that day been forwarded by courier to the commander-in-chief. "And why the deuce are we going to fight Bonaparte?" remarked Shinshin. "He has stopped Austria's cackle and I fear it will be our turn next." The colonel was a stout, tall, plethoric German, evidently devoted to the service and patriotically Russian. He resented Shinshin's remark. "It is for the reason, my good sir," said he, speaking with a German accent, "for the reason that the Emperor knows that. He declares in the manifesto that he cannot feel with indifference the danger of reigning Russia and that the safety and dignity of the empire as well as the sanctity of its alliances." He spoke this last word with particular emphasis as if in it lay the gist of the matter. Then with the unerring official memory that characterized him he repeated from the opening words of the manifesto. "And the wish, which constitutes the emperor's sole and absolute aim, to establish peace in Europe on firm foundations, has now decided him to dispatch part of the army abroad and to create a new condition for the attainment of that purpose. That, my dear sir, is VY, he concluded, drinking a tumbler of wine with dignity and looking to the count for approval. "Connaissez-vous le proverbe asterisk, Jerome, Jerome, do not roam, but turn spindles at home," said Shinshin, puckering his brows and smiling. "C'est la news convient à Merville, asterisk, too, Suvorov now, he knew what he was about, yet they beat him à plate couture, asterisk, 3, and where are we to find Suvorovs now? Je vous demande un peu, asterisk, 4, said he, continually changing from French to Russian. Asterisk, do you know the proverb? Asterisk, 2, that suits us down to the ground. Asterisk, 3, hollow. Asterisk, 4, I just ask you that. We must fight to the last tear up of our blood, said the colonel, thumping the table, and we must die for our emperor, and then all will be well. And we must discuss it as little as possible, he dwelt particularly on the word possible. As possible, he ended, again turning to the count. That is how we old hussars look at it, and there's an end of it. And how do you, a young man and a young hussar, how do you judge of it, he added, addressing Nicholas, who when he heard that the war was being discussed had turned from his partner with eyes and ears intent on the colonel. I am quite of your opinion, replied Nicholas, flaming up, turning his plate round and moving his wineglasses about with as much decision and desperation as though he were at that moment facing some great danger. I am convinced that we Russians must die or conquer, he concluded, conscious, as were others, after the words were uttered that his remarks were too enthusiastic and emphatic for the occasion and were therefore awkward. What you said just now was splendid, said his partner Julie. Sonia trembled all over and blushed to her ears and behind them and down to her neck and shoulders while Nicholas was speaking. Pierre listened to the colonel's speech and nodded approvingly. That's fine, said he. The young man's a real hussar, shouted the colonel, again thumping the table. What are you making such a noise about over there? Maria Dmitrievna's deep voice suddenly inquired from the other end of the table. What are you thumping the table for, she demanded of the hussar, and why are you exciting yourself? Do you think the French are here? I am speaking the truce, replied the hussar with a smile. It's all about the war, the count shouted down the table. You know my son's going, Maria Dmitrievna. My son is going. I have 4 sons in the army but still I don't fret. It is all in God's hands. You may die in your bed or God may spare you in a battle, replied Maria Dmitrievna's deep voice, which easily carried the whole length of the table. That's true. Once more the conversations concentrated, the ladies at the one end and the men's at the other. You won't ask, Natasha's little brother was saying, I know you won't ask. I will, replied Natasha. Her face suddenly flushed with reckless and joyous resolution. She half rose, by a glance inviting Pierre, who sat opposite, to listen to what was coming, and turning to her mother. Mama, rang out the clear contralto notes of her childish voice, audible the whole length of the table. What is it? Asked the countess, startled, but seeing by her daughter's face that it was only mischief, she shook a finger at her sternly with a threatening and forbidding movement of her head. The conversation was hushed. "Mama! What sweets are we going to have?" and Natasha's voice sounded still more firm and resolute. The countess tried to frown, but could not. Marya Dmitrievna shook her fat finger. "Cossack," she said threateningly. Most of the guests, uncertain how to regard this sally, looked at the elders. "You had better take care," said the countess. "Mama! What sweets are we going to have?" Natasha again cried boldly, with saucy gaiety, confident that her prank would be taken in good part. Sonia and fat little Petya doubled up with laughter. "You see. I have asked," whispered Natasha to her little brother and to Pierre, glancing at him again. "Ice pudding, but you won't get any," said Marya Dmitrievna. Natasha saw there was nothing to be afraid of, and so she braved even Marya Dmitrievna. "Marya Dmitrievna. What kind of ice pudding? I don't like ice cream. Carrot ices. No." "What kind, Marya Dmitrievna? What kind?" she almost screamed, "I want to know." Marya Dmitrievna and the countess burst out laughing, and all the guests joined in. Everyone laughed, not at Marya Dmitrievna's answer but at the incredible boldness and smartness of this little girl who had dared to treat Marya Dmitrievna in this fashion. Natasha only desisted when she had been told that there would be pineapple ice. Before the ices, champagne was served round. The band again struck up, the count and countess kissed, and the guests, leaving their seats, went up to congratulate the countess, and reached across the table to clink glasses with the count, with the children, and with one another. Again the footmen rushed about, chairs scraped, and in the same order in which they had entered but with redder faces, the guests returned to the drawing-room and to the count's study. Chapter 20. The card tables were drawn out, sets made up for Boston, and the count's visitors settled themselves, some in the two drawing-rooms, some in the sitting-room, some in the library. The count, holding his cards fanwise, kept himself with difficulty from dropping into his usual after-dinner nap, and laughed at everything. The young people, at the countess' instigation, gathered round the clavichord and harp. Julie by general request played first. After she had played a little air with variations on the harp, she joined the other young ladies in begging Natasha and Nicholas, who were noted for their musical talent, to sing something. Natasha, who was treated as though she were grown up, was evidently very proud of this but at the same time felt shy. "What shall we sing?" she said. "The Brook," suggested Nicholas. "Well, then, let's be quick." "Boris, come here," said Natasha. "But where is Sonia?" She looked round and seeing that her friend was not in the room ran to look for her. Running into Sonia's room and not finding her there, Natasha ran to the nursery, but Sonia was not there either. Natasha concluded that she must be on the chest in the passage. The chest in the passage was the place of mourning for the younger female generation in the Rostov household. And there in fact was Sonia lying face downward on nurse's dirty feather bed on the top of the chest, crumpling her gauzy pink dress under her, hiding her face with her slender fingers, and sobbing so convulsively that her bare little shoulders shook. Natasha's face, which had been so radiantly happy all that saint's day, suddenly changed, her eyes became fixed, and then a shiver passed down her broad neck and the corners of her mouth drooped. "Sonia! What is it? What is the matter? Boo! Boo! Boo!" And Natasha's large mouth widened, making her look quite ugly, and she began to wail like a baby without knowing why, except that Sonia was crying. Sonia tried to lift her head to answer but could not, and hid her face still deeper in the bed. Natasha wept, sitting on the blue-striped feather bed and hugging her friend. With an effort Sonia sat up and began wiping her eyes and explaining. "Nicholas is going away in a week's time, his papers have come, he told me himself, but still I should not cry," and she showed a paper she held in her hand, with the verses Nicholas had written. "Still, I should not cry, but you can't, no one can understand, what a soul he has." And she began to cry again because he had such a noble soul. "It's all very well for you. I am not envious. I love you and Boris also, she went on, gaining a little strength. He is nice, there are no difficulties in your way. But Nicholas is my cousin, one would have to, the Metropolitan himself, and even then it can't be done. And besides, if she tells Mama, Sonia looked upon the Countess as her mother and called her so, that I am spoiling Nicholas' career and am heartless and ungrateful, while truly. God is my witness, and she made the sign of the cross, I love her so much, and all of you, only Vera. And what for? What have I done to her? I am so grateful to you that I would willingly sacrifice everything, only I have nothing. Sonia could not continue, and again hid her face in her hands and in the feather bed. Natasha began consoling her, but her face showed that she understood all the gravity of her friend's trouble. Sonia, she suddenly exclaimed, as if she had guessed the true reason of her friend's sorrow, I'm sure Vera has said something to you since dinner. Hasn't she? Yes, these verses Nicholas wrote himself and I copied some others, and she found them on my table and said she'd show them to Mama, and that I was ungrateful, and that Mama would never allow him to marry me, but that he'll marry Julie. You see how he's been with her all day. Natasha, what have I done to deserve it? And again she began to sob, more bitterly than before. Natasha lifted her up, hugged her, and, smiling through her tears, began comforting her. Sonia, don't believe her, darling. Don't believe her. Do you remember how we and Nicholas, all three of us, talked in the sitting room after supper? Why, we settled how everything was to be. I don't quite remember how, but don't you remember that it could all be arranged and how nice it all was? There's Uncle Shinshin's brother has married his first cousin. And we are only second cousins, you know. And Boris says it is quite possible. You know I have told him all about it. And he is so clever and so good, said Natasha. Don't you cry, Sonia, dear love, darling Sonia, and she kissed her and laughed. Vera's spiteful, never mind her. And all will come right and she won't say anything to Mama. Nicholas will tell her himself, and he doesn't care at all for Julie. Natasha kissed her on the hair. Sonia sat up. The little kitten brightened, its eyes shone, and it seemed ready to lift its tail, jump down on its soft paws, and begin playing with the ball of worsted as a kitten should. Do you think so? Really? Truly, she said, quickly smoothing her frock and hair. Really, truly, answered Natasha, pushing in a crisp lock that had strayed from under her friend's plaits. Both laughed. Well, let's go and sing The Brook. Come along. Do you know, that fat Pierre who sat opposite me is so funny, said Natasha, stopping suddenly. I feel so happy. And she set off at a run along the passage. Sonia, shaking off some down which clung to her and tucking away the verses in the bosom of her dress close to her bony little chest, ran after Natasha down the passage into the sitting room with flushed face and light, joyous steps. At the visitor's request the young people sang the quartet, The Brook, with which everyone was delighted. Then Nicholas sang a song he had just learned. At night time in the moon's fair glow how sweet, as fancies wander free, to feel that in this world there's one who still is thinking but of thee. That while her fingers touch the harp wafting sweet music o'er the Leah, it is for thee thus swells her heart, sighing its message out to thee. A day or two, then bliss unspoilt, but oh! Till then I cannot live. He had not finished the last verse before the young people began to get ready to dance in the large hall, and the sound of the feet and the coughing of the musicians were heard from the gallery. Pierre was sitting in the drawing-room where Shinshin had engaged him, as a man recently returned from abroad, in a political conversation in which several others joined but which bored Pierre. When the music began Natasha came in and walking straight up to Pierre said, laughing and blushing. Mama told me to ask you to join the dancers. I am afraid of mixing the figures, Pierre replied, but if you will be my teacher, and lowering his big arm he offered it to the slender little girl. While the couples were arranging themselves and the musicians tuning up, Pierre sat down with his little partner. Natasha was perfectly happy, she was dancing with a grown-up man, who had been abroad. She was sitting in a conspicuous place and talking to him like a grown-up lady. She had a fan in her hand that one of the ladies had given her to hold. Assuming quite the pose of a society woman, heaven knows when and where she had learned it, she talked with her partner, fanning herself and smiling over the fan. "Dear, dear. Just look at her," exclaimed the countess as she crossed the ballroom, pointing to Natasha. Natasha blushed and laughed. "Well, really, Mama. Why should you? What is there to be surprised at?" In the midst of the third écossaise there was a clatter of chairs being pushed back in the sitting room where the Count and Maria Dmitrievna had been playing cards with the majority of the more distinguished and older visitors. They now, stretching themselves after sitting so long, and replacing their purses and pocketbooks, entered the ballroom. First came Maria Dmitrievna and the Count, both with merry countenances. The Count, with playful ceremony somewhat in ballet style, offered his bent arm to Maria Dmitrievna. He drew himself up, a smile of debonair gallantry lit up his face, and as soon as the last figure of the écossaise was ended, he clapped his hands to the musicians and shouted up to their gallery, addressing the first violin. "Seaman. Do you know the Daniel Cooper?" This was the Count's favorite dance, which he had danced in his youth. Strictly speaking, Daniel Cooper was one figure of the Anglaise. "Look at Papa," shouted Natasha to the whole company, and quite forgetting that she was dancing with a grown-up partner she bent her curly head to her knees and made the whole room ring with her laughter. And indeed everybody in the room looked with a smile of pleasure at the jovial old gentleman, who standing beside his tall and stout partner, Maria Dmitrievna, curved his arms, beat time, straightened his shoulders, turned out his toes, tapped gently with his foot, and, by a smile that broadened his round face more and more, prepared the onlookers for what was to follow. As soon as the provocatively gay strains of Daniel Cooper, somewhat resembling those of a merry peasant dance, began to sound, all the doorways of the ballroom were suddenly filled by the domestic serfs, the men on one side and the women on the other, who with beaming faces had come to see their master making merry. "Just look at the master. A regular eagle he is," loudly remarked the nurse, as she stood in one of the doorways. The Count danced well and knew it. But his partner could not and did not want to dance well. Her enormous figure stood erect, her powerful arms hanging down, she had handed her reticule to the Countess, and only her stern but handsome face really joined in the dance. What was expressed by the whole of the Count's plump figure, in Maria Dmitrievna found expression only in her more and more beaming face and quivering nose. But if the Count, getting more and more into the swing of it, charmed the spectators by the unexpectedness of his adroit maneuvers and the agility with which he capered about on his light feet, Maria Dmitrievna produced no less impression by slight exertions, the least effort to move her shoulders or bend her arms when turning, or stamp her foot, which everyone appreciated in view of her size and habitual severity. The dance grew livelier and livelier. The other couples could not attract a moment's attention to their own evolutions and did not even try to do so. All were watching the Count and Maria Dmitrievna. Natasha kept pulling everyone by sleeve or dress, urging them to "look at Papa," though as it was they never took their eyes off the couple. In the intervals of the dance the Count, breathing deeply, waved and shouted to the musicians to play faster. Faster, faster, and faster, lightly, more lightly, and yet more lightly whirled the Count, flying round Maria Dmitrievna, now on his toes, now on his heels, until, turning his partner round to her seat, he executed the final pas, raising his soft foot backwards, bowing his perspiring head, smiling and making a wide sweep with his arm, amid a thunder of applause and laughter led by Natasha. Both partners stood still, breathing heavily and wiping their faces with their cambric handkerchiefs. "That's how we used to dance in our time, ma chère," said the Count. "That was a Daniel Cooper," exclaimed Maria Dmitrievna, tucking up her sleeves and puffing heavily. Chapter 21. While in the Rostovs' ballroom the sixth Anglaise was being danced, to a tune in which the weary musicians blundered, and while tired footmen and cooks were getting the supper, Count Bezukov had a sixth stroke. The doctors pronounced recovery impossible. After a mute confession, communion was administered to the dying man, preparations made for the sacrament of unction, and in his house there was the bustle and thrill of suspense usual at such moments. Outside the house, Beyond the gates, a group of undertakers, who hid whenever a carriage drove up, waited in expectation of an important order for an expensive funeral. The military governor of Moscow, who had been assiduous in sending aides to camp to inquire after the count's health, came himself that evening to bid a last farewell to the celebrated grandee of Catherine's court, Count Bezukov. The magnificent reception room was crowded. Everyone stood up respectfully when the military governor, having stayed about half an hour alone with the dying man, passed out, slightly acknowledging their bows and trying to escape as quickly as possible from the glances fixed on him by the doctors, clergy, and relatives of the family. Prince Vasily, who had grown thinner and paler during the last few days, escorted him to the door, repeating something to him several times in low tones. When the military governor had gone, Prince Vasily sat down all alone on a chair in the ballroom, crossing one leg high over the other, leaning his elbow on his knee and covering his face with his hand. After sitting so for a while he rose, and, looking about him with frightened eyes, went with unusually hurried steps down the long corridor leading to the back of the house, to the room of the eldest princess. Those who were in the dimly lit reception room spoke in nervous whispers, and, whenever anyone went into or came from the dying man's room, grew silent and gazed with eyes full of curiosity or expectancy at his door, which creaked slightly when opened. "The limits of human life are fixed and may not be overpassed," said an old priest to a lady who had taken a seat beside him and was listening naively to his words. "I wonder, is it not too late to administer unction?" asked the lady, adding the priest's clerical title, as if she had no opinion of her own on the subject. "Ah, madam, it is a great sacrament," replied the priest, passing his hand over the thin grizzled strands of hair combed back across his bald head. Who was that? The military governor himself was being asked at the other side of the room. "How young-looking he is." "Yes, and he is over 60. I hear the count no longer recognizes anyone. They wished to administer the sacrament of unction. I knew someone who received that sacrament 7 times. The second princess had just come from the sick room with her eyes red from weeping and sat down beside Dr. Lorraine, who was sitting in a graceful pose under a portrait of Catherine, leaning his elbow on a table. "Beautiful," said the doctor in answer to a remark about the weather. "The weather is beautiful, princess, and besides, in Moscow one feels as if one were in the country." "Yes, indeed," replied the princess with a sigh. "So he may have something to drink?" Lorraine considered. "Has he taken his medicine?" "Yes." The doctor glanced at his watch. "Take a glass of boiled water and put a pinch of cream of tartar," and he indicated with his delicate fingers what he meant by a pinch. "Dir has never been a gaze," a German doctor was saying to an aide-de-camp, "that one lifts after the third stroke." "And what a well-preserved man he was," remarked the aide-de-camp. "And who will inherit his wealth?" he added in a whisper. "It won't go begging," replied the German with a smile. Everyone again looked toward the door, which creaked as the second princess went in with the drink she had prepared according to Lorraine's instructions. The German doctor went up to Lorraine. "Do you think he can last till morning?" asked the German, addressing Lorraine in French which he pronounced badly. Lorraine, pursing up his lips, waved a severely negative finger before his nose. "Tonight, not later," said he in a low voice, and he moved away with a decorous smile of self-satisfaction at being able clearly to understand and state the patient's condition. Meanwhile Prince Vasily had opened the door into the princess' room. In this room it was almost dark, only 2 tiny lamps were burning before the icons and there was a pleasant scent of flowers and burnt pastilles. The room was crowded with small pieces of furniture, whatnots, cupboards, and little tables. The quilt of a high, white feather bed was just visible behind a screen. A small dog began to bark. "Ah, is it you, cousin?" She rose and smoothed her hair, which was as usual so extremely smooth that it seemed to be made of one piece with her head and covered with varnish. "Has anything happened?" she asked. "I am so terrified." "No, there is no change. I only came to have a talk about business, Katish, muttered the prince, seating himself wearily on the chair she had just vacated. "You have made the place warm, I must say," he remarked. "Well, sit down, let's have a talk." Catherine. I thought perhaps something had happened, she said with her unchanging stonily severe expression, and, sitting down opposite the prince, she prepared to listen. I wish to get a nap, mon cousin, but I can't. Well, my dear, said Prince Vasili, taking her hand and bending it downwards as was his habit. It was plain that this, well, referred to much that they both understood without naming. The princess, who had a straight, rigid body, abnormally long for her legs, looked directly at Prince Vasili with no sign of emotion in her prominent grey eyes. Then she shook her head and glanced up at the icons with a sigh. This might have been taken as an expression of sorrow and devotion, or of weariness and hope of resting before long. Prince Vasili understood it as an expression of weariness. And I, he said, do you think it is easier for me? I am as worn out as a post horse, but still I must have a talk with you, Katish, a very serious talk. Prince Vasili said no more and his cheeks began to twitch nervously, now on one side, now on the other, giving his face an unpleasant expression which was never to be seen on it in a drawing-room. His eyes too seemed strange, at one moment they looked impudently sly and at the next glanced round in alarm. The princess, holding her little dog on her lap with her thin bony hands, looked attentively into Prince Vasili's eyes, evidently resolved not to be the first to break silence, if she had to wait till morning. Well, you see, my dear princess and cousin, Catherine Semyonovna, continued Prince Vasili, returning to his theme, apparently not without an inner struggle, at such a moment as this one must think of everything. One must think of the future, of all of you. I love you all, like children of my own, as you know. The princess continued to look at him without moving, and with the same dull expression. And then of course my family has also to be considered, Prince Vasili went on, testily pushing away a little table without looking at her. You know, Katish, that we, you three sisters, Mamontov, and my wife, are the count's only direct heirs. I know how hard it is for you to talk or think of such matters. It is no easier for me, but, my dear, I am getting on for 60 and must be prepared for anything. Do you know I have sent for Pierre? The count, pointing to his portrait, definitely demanded that he should be called. Prince Vasili looked questioningly at the princess, but could not make out whether she was considering what he had just said or whether she was simply looking at him. There is one thing I constantly pray God to grant, mon cousin, she replied, and it is that he would be merciful to him and would allow his noble soul peacefully to leave this. Yes, of course, interrupted Prince Vasili impatiently, rubbing his bald head and angrily pulling back toward him the little table that he had pushed away. But, in short, the fact is, you know yourself that last winter the count made a will by which he left all his property, not to us his direct heirs, but to Pierre. He has made wills enough, quietly remarked the princess. But he cannot leave the estate to Pierre. Pierre is illegitimate. But, my dear, said Prince Vasili suddenly, clutching the little table and becoming more animated and talking more rapidly, what if a letter has been written to the emperor in which the count asks for Pierre's legitimation? Do you understand that in consideration of the count's services, his request would be granted? The princess smiled as people do who think they know more about the subject under discussion than those they are talking with. I can tell you more, continued Prince Vasili, seizing her hand, that letter was written, though it was not sent, and the emperor knew of it. The only question is, has it been destroyed or not? If not, then as soon as all is over, and Prince Vasili sighed to intimate what he meant by the words all is over, and the count's papers are opened, the will and letter will be delivered to the emperor, and the petition will certainly be granted. Pierre will get everything as the legitimate son. And our share? Asked the princess smiling ironically, as if anything might happen, only not that. But, my poor Katish, it is as clear as daylight. He will then be the legal heir to everything and you won't get anything. You must know, my dear, whether the will and letter were written, and whether they have been destroyed or not. And if they have somehow been overlooked, you ought to know where they are, and must find them, because... What next? The princess interrupted, smiling sardonically and not changing the expression of her eyes. I am a woman, and you think we are all stupid, but I know this, an illegitimate son cannot inherit, unbattered. Asterisk she added, as if supposing that this translation of the word would effectively prove to Prince Vasily the invalidity of his contention. Asterisk a bastard. Well, really, Katish. Can't you understand? You are so intelligent, how is it you don't see that if the Count has written a letter to the Emperor begging him to recognize Pierre as legitimate, it follows that Pierre will not be Pierre but will become Count Bezukov, and will then inherit everything under the will. And if the will and letter are not destroyed, then you will have nothing but the consolation of having been dutiful et tout ce que essen sut, asterisk that's certain. Asterisk and all that follows therefrom. I know the will was made, but I also know that it is invalid, and you, mon cousin, seem to consider me a perfect fool, said the princess with the expression women assume when they suppose they are saying something witty and stinging. My dear Princess Catherine Semenovna, began Prince Vasily impatiently, I came here not to wrangle with you, but to talk about your interests as with a kinswoman, a good, kind, true relation. And I tell you for the 10th time that if the letter to the Emperor and the will in Pierre's favor are among the Count's papers, then, my dear girl, you and your sisters are not heiresses. If you don't believe me, then believe an expert. I have just been talking to Dmitri Onyefrich, the family solicitor, and he says the same. At this a sudden change evidently took place in the princess' ideas, her thin lips grew white, though her eyes did not change, and her voice when she began to speak passed through such transitions as she herself evidently did not expect. That would be a fine thing, said she. I never wanted anything and I don't now. She pushed the little dog off her lap and smoothed her dress. And this is gratitude, this is recognition for those who have sacrificed everything for his sake, she cried. It's splendid. Fine. I don't want anything, Prince. Yes, but you are not the only one. There are your sisters, replied Prince Vasily. But the princess did not listen to him. Yes, I knew it long ago but had forgotten. I knew that I could expect nothing but meanness, deceit, envy, intrigue, and ingratitude, the blackest ingratitude, in this house. Do you or do you not know where that will is? Insisted Prince Vasily, his cheeks twitching more than ever. Yes, I was a fool. I still believed in people, loved them, and sacrificed myself. But only the base, the vile succeed. I know who has been intriguing. The princess wished to rise, but the prince held her by the hand. She had the air of one who has suddenly lost faith in the whole human race. She gave her companion an angry glance. There is still time, my dear. You must remember, Katish, that it was all done casually in a moment of anger, of illness, and was afterwards forgotten. Our duty, my dear, is to rectify his mistake, to ease his last moments by not letting him commit this injustice, and not to let him die feeling that he is rendering unhappy those who sacrificed everything for him, chimed in the princess, who would again have risen had not the prince still held her fast, though he never could appreciate it. No, mon cousin, she added with a sigh, I shall always remember that in this world one must expect no reward, that in this world there is neither honor nor justice. In this world one has to be cunning and cruel. Now come, come. Be reasonable. I know your excellent heart. No, I have a wicked heart. I know your heart, repeated the prince. I value your friendship and wish you to have as good an opinion of me. Don't upset yourself, and let us talk sensibly while there is still time, be it a day or be it but an hour. Tell me all you know about the will, and above all where it is. You must know. We will take it at once and show it to the Count. He has, no doubt, forgotten it and will wish to destroy it. You understand that my sole desire is conscientiously to carry out his wishes, that is my only reason for being here. I came simply to help him and you. Now I see it all. I know who has been intriguing, I know, cried the princess. That's not the point, my dear. It's that protégé of yours, that sweet Princess Drubetskaya, that Anna Mikhailovna whom I would not take for a housemaid, the infamous, vile woman. Do not let us lose any time. Ah, don't talk to me. Last winter she wheedled herself in here and told the Count such vile, disgraceful things about us, especially about Sophie. I can't repeat them, that it made the Count quite ill and he would not see us for a whole fortnight. I know it was then he wrote this vile, infamous paper, but I thought the thing was invalid. We've got to it at last, why did you not tell me about it sooner? It's in the inlaid portfolio that he keeps under his pillow, said the princess, ignoring his question. Now I know. Yes, if I have a sin, a great sin, it is hatred of that vile woman, almost shrieked the princess, now quite changed. And what does she come worming herself in here for? But I will give her a piece of my mind. The time will come.